Before this episode begins, I'd like to say that I will be heading to DinoCon UK on the 25th and 26th of July in Birmingham. So if you see me wandering around in my podcast t-shirt, come and say hello. I have bookmarks and pin badges to give away as well. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll see you there. Imagine you are sat in a meeting hall in the southwest English city of Plymouth. It's the summer of 1841, and you are with your learned colleagues and gentlemen scientists of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, when a thin, slightly balding man in his late 30s takes to the stand. He is about to coin a term that will upend our understanding of prehistory. The man is Richard Owen, and the word is dinosaur. I'm Roland Squire, and this is The Pirates Don't Eat the Tourists. Welcome back. First off, thank you so much for all of the great comments I've received about episode 1. We kicked off this second season with looking at how we first made sense of the fossils humans have been finding for millennia, with my interview with author Natalie Lawrence. This week, I'm moving the story forward a bit with the introduction of a central figure of the time, and someone who will play a prominent role over the next couple of episodes. Richard Owen was born in Lancaster, England, in 1804 and started his studies as a surgeon apprentice at the Royal College of Surgeons. He would later go on to be in charge of the Natural History Department at the British Museum before successfully lobbying government to open the Natural History Museum that stands still to this very day in South Kensington in 1881. He is someone that seems to have had this innate power for anatomy, and he was able, so it was said at least, that even from one bone he could describe with great accuracy what the animal looked like and how it was put together, how the bones fitted together. He's probably most famous for, though, today, coming up with the term Dinosauria, which he did in that meeting in 1841. Now, in front of me here on my computer, I've currently got that report of the 11th meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, held at Plymouth in July 1841. Now, this was printed by John Murray Press in 1842. Right, let's just make it a bit bigger. So, looking at the contents, we've got objects and rules of the association. That goes on for quite a few pages. There's treasurer's account. It's the meetings, the nitty-gritty of running this association. And then further down, we've got the reports of researches in science. And there's reports on poisons, the Leith tide observations. There's not many pages for that. Here we are. So if we go page 2 of the document, the contents, you get Report of British Fossil Reptiles by Richard Owen, Esquire. So let's make our way to that page. Let's scroll through all the officers, various bits. Right. I will put a link to this document in the show notes because I think it's worth anybody just having a look at these historical documents. If you've never looked at one before or don't think that you have access to them, you do. Well, I seem to have landed on a page with a load of... here we are. Dinosaurians. I'm on page 102. Initially he starts off talking about the characteristics, the reason for why this term is going to come about is because he believes that structurally, anatomically, they are very different to what he's found in part 1. And so they deserve their own classification, their own naming. And in this bit, the combination of such characters, some as the sacral ones, altogether peculiar among reptiles, others borrowed, as it were, from groups now distinct from each other, and all manifested by creatures far surpassing in size the largest of existing reptiles. You're not kidding. Will it is presumed to be deemed sufficient ground for establishing a distinct tribe or suborder of saurian reptiles, for which I would propose the name of Dinosauria. There we are. It's in print, 1841. So it's quite, as nerdy as it sounds, that's really quite exciting to see in print. Just that paragraph, how he's broken that down and then leading to that's his cold open to all of this. And there's a little asterisk next to it, so we understand the derivation of the word, and it is. So it's from the Greek, meaning fearfully great, and lizard. So fearfully great lizard. I always thought it was terrible lizards or terrific lizards, but no. Fearfully great. That's an interesting term that he uses, because really his naming of this is seen now as being in direct conflict to what Charles Darwin would put forward for evolution. Owen believes firmly in, he's a creationist, so he firmly believes in the fact that evolution can't happen because that would take out God from the equation. He believes that animals change over time, but not in the way that Darwin does and the way that now we understand they do. And so to name them dinosaurs and call them fearfully great means that the reptiles that we have in present day are lesser. So yeah, there it is. Another thing that is important in the Owen story is that he was famous for clashes and feuds with many prominent scientists of the day. I'll cover that in more detail later on in the series, but Owen had a falling out with Gideon Mantell, and later in the century with Charles Darwin over his views and beliefs of evolution. And actually, in fact, in this very report that I'm looking at, there is a recorded spat between Owen and another member, Naismith, about who spoke about a certain term first. And we've got all the letters in this document between the two, and Owen is exceptionally forceful with his demands that the president should expunge Naismith's paper from the meeting and not just give proper attribution, but that actually the whole thing should be dismissed as plagiarism. It is clearly a dog-eat-dog world, and it seems that Owen, many, many times, despite his stature and appearance, came out as the bigger, more aggressive dog. And the reason for that is because Owen had a lot of influential friends. And therefore, when the centrepiece of Prince Albert's 1851 Great Exhibition that happened in Hyde Park, the Crystal Palace, was given a permanent residence in South London, Owen was tasked with overseeing a project to bring animals from prehistory back to life in sculptural form. Now, to give me some background to what happened there and what would become known as the Crystal Palace Dinosaurs, I reached out to the incredible paleoartist, paleontologist and author Mark Witton, and I asked him where you can actually find them.
You'll find them in the southern suburbs of London. So they're in a park that's called Crystal Palace Park now. This was a dedicated space built in the 1850s to hold an enormous sort of World's Fair type event. That it was a permanent installation that was built off the back of another event called the Great Exhibition.
Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
And in the middle of the Great Exhibition is this enormous glass building. People liked it so much, they said, let's make this thing permanent. Let's move it to a dedicated space in London, and we're going to call it the Crystal Palace. And it's going to have these huge park grounds. Within the palace itself, there were all many different types of exhibitions showcasing all sorts of stuff to do with Victorian culture, Victorian understanding of the world. So you could walk through parts of ancient Egypt. You could walk through recreated ancient Greece. You could go through the Renaissance. And if you went out into the park grounds, not only did you see fabulously landscaped sort of open space to walk through with these enormous fountains, but you could also go and see how the Victorians understood prehistory. And the idea is that you would walk through different parts of geological time. You wouldn't just see dinosaurs here, but you'd see sculptures of all sorts of extinct animals. So you'd have some fossil mammals, you have the flying reptiles and marine reptiles along with dinosaurs, and then you'd have animals that were even older than dinosaurs. Alongside this were geological displays. So you had these simulations of coal outcrops and of iron outcrops. And these, of course, were related to how the Victorians built their empire. This is
probably as important as anything else that they were doing there. Yeah.
Absolutely. The guidebooks would say, the coal is what's powering the train that brought you to Crystal Palace, and the iron is what built the rails that the train ran on. So the idea was that these exhibits, both the prehistoric and the historic, it would be an educational experience. At the same time, it was also a commercial venture. So you're actually paying to get into the Crystal Palace. You're paying to see the dinosaurs. So this is one of the first times that we had this mix of sort of education and commerce. And it was so a bit of an experiment, and it didn't really pay off, to be honest. The Crystal Palace, I think it only started to make money in the 1930s, shortly before the building burned down. But the dinosaurs have had this continued legacy because they were the only part of the big enterprise that survived until the modern day intact. So you can still go to Crystal Palace Park. You can see the foundations of the building. Things like the fountains are gone. The other recreations from history are all long gone. But in the little corner of Crystal Palace Park, you can still walk through the geological court pretty much as people did when the Crystal Palace opened in 1854.
Amazing. And what sort of impact did that have on Victorian society? Was it a big attraction of its day?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it was certainly a well-liked enough as the Great Exhibition that there was a big public push for this to occur. The politicians at the time were a bit uncertain about it, but certainly among the public, there was a big push to have a permanent, great exhibition to keep it going and form the Crystal Palace Company. And it was certainly very popular. The reasons for its, commercial struggling. I think that there's a multifaceted discussion to be had there. It's all about when it was available to the public. The people were working incredibly long hours back then. People didn't have as much free time as we have now.
Yeah.
Issues to do with the availability of alcohol, this sort of thing. I don't think they had an alcohol license for a long time. So for certain people,
yeah,
if you've got your Sunday afternoon off, you're not going to Crystal Palace. You're going to go to the pub. So there's all sorts of reasons that affected why it wasn't a commercial success. But the dinosaurs were a big hit with the public, at least. And they liked hearing about them being built. They were showcased regularly in newspapers. So even before the park was open, the dinosaurs were being used to advertise Crystal Palace.
Right, okay.
I'm sure many people will have heard of the New Year's Eve banquet in one of the iguanodon sculptures, which it wasn't the sculpture that's still in the park today. It was actually the life-size clay sculpture that they used to get everything in place. And then there's what we have in the park now is essentially a cast of that's been rebuilt in brick and concrete. But of course, what a great publicity stunt that was. And it got a full page spread in the Illustrated London News. And there was all sorts of other coverage by the newspapers. The Guardian was following developments of Crystal Palace, because it wasn't actually the dinosaurs, the geological court. They weren't actually finished by the time that Crystal Palace Park opened. And the best record we have for that is the Guardian's continuing interest to say, today in May 1855, Waterhouse Hawkins is installing the last of the pterosaur sculptures. And he describes how he took it across a number of the sculptures are on an island. And so it describes how Hawkins was floated across on a little raft with the pterosaur sculpture. And I was sort of holding on to it.
So who is this Waterhouse Hawkins?
You end up talking about this so much, you just forget that. Let's forget to introduce the main man. So we're talking here about Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, who was a 19th century natural history illustrator. And he's also the man who led the team who built the Crystal Palace dinosaurs. So there are actually a couple of people working on the geological court. We can't give Hawkins all the credit. The geological illustrations were overseen by Thomas Anstead, who was a geologist. He was helped by another individual who would help with the landscaping. So we've got a team for the geology side of things. But then on the paleontological side of things, we have Hawkins doing the sculpting of the models. And in theory, he's overseen by Richard Owen. I say in theory about Owen's involvement because the historic record doesn't really support the amount of influence that he is sometimes said to have had.
Okay.
There are plenty of books that say that Hawkins was really being directed very closely by Owen, and some sources even go to say that, this was all Owen's idea.
Okay.
The entire idea for the geological court came from Owen.
Were they written by Owen at all?
No, he seems to have barely ever visited them while they were even being built. And we say this because there are letters from Hawkins and from the Crystal Palace Company, i.e. the people who are paying Owen to be the consultant here. And they're writing letters to him saying, can you please come and have a look at these things that Hawkins is building? Can you please do your job? What history records and what people have been saying about the Crystal Palace dinosaurs aren't quite the same thing. And this is a few years ago, I helped to write a book on this. It's called The Art and Science of the Crystal Palace Dinosaurs. And this is one thing that we're very keen to clear up in that, is that Owen was certainly involved in the project, but he was essentially a sort of a celebrity scientist. He was just a stamp of authority to put over everything. It seems that the real paleontological intellect behind the creation of the extinct animals was probably all Hawkins. We think that he was he was coming up with the designs. He was doing the research himself. We know that he wrote to people like William Buckland to say, can you give me some dimensions of Megalosaurus? This is the kind of thing that you'd expect Owen to have been doing. We know that Owen was working on Megalosaurus around the same time that Hawkins would have been building his version of Megalosaurus. And yet Hawkins is reaching out to other scientists to say, can you help?
Yeah. Why do you think Owen wasn't that involved then?
I mean, he was a busy man. I'm not to say that he has a good excuse, but obviously he was a sought after, busy individual. He might have thought the whole thing was a little bit beneath him.
Right. Okay.
I wonder. I mean, I'm not an Owen expert, and there's lots to talk about with Richard
Yes.
Owen. Lots of opinions.
Yeah.
There's an attempt to. I found this. when publishing in this area, sometimes you get comments back from the reviewers of your papers, and I've had people accuse me of sort of towing the line of like, Owen's the villain, and he's trying to drag his name through the mud. And my attitude on this is that I'm not an expert on Owen. All I can say is the history of this site, what we know about it, suggests he wasn't really doing his job. You can fit that into whatever model of Owen you like, as a sort of misunderstood, complex historic figure, or someone who was, quite a dastardly, underhand, selfish individual out to further his own good. All I'll say is that for whatever reason, he didn't do the job he was being asked to do. You
mentioned in your book actually that the opening of the Crystal Palace and the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, kind of the impact of that and its combination of, as you say, commerce and art and science is sort of equatable to the release of Jurassic Park.
I mean, in the day it was. These were, for a long time, these were people. These were what what lay people at least thought dinosaurs were like. We have to remember that in the 19th century, dinosaurs weren't as popular as they are today. People wouldn't even have really thought about these as dinosaurs. They would have thought about them as primordial animals, as things from beings from deep time. They wouldn't have necessarily been thinking about them specifically as dinosaurs. So of course, when we talk about Crystal Palace dinosaurs today, dinosaurs needs to be in quotation marks, because we're really talking also about several species of mammal, flying reptiles, marine reptiles, dicynodonts, temnospondyls, plesiosaurs, teleosaurs, and ichthyosaurs as well. So this, dinosaurs here is being used in its loosest possible term of extinct, any sort of extinct animal. But certainly, in the 19th century, these reconstructions were very influential. And so even in places like America, people were selling models of the Crystal Palace reconstructions. So around the world, when people were thinking of dinosaurs, whether they were directly being shaped by Crystal Palace or not, the artwork was being copied from Crystal Palace. So it was coming down to them sort of through secondary and tertiary sources. So these reconstructions were really filtering into the culture of popularized paleontology. And this in itself is quite fascinating, because one of the things that people know about some of the Crystal Palace dinosaurs is that they don't really look anything like modern interpretations of those animals. And there's some nuance to this, because some of the reconstructions there are actually really good, and they really stand the test of time. So the extinct mammals, they're not a million miles away from how we would restore them today. The marine reptiles, again, they're not too bad. There's some tweaks we'd make here and there, but he had pretty good fossils to be looking at.
They seem to be quite abundant, those fossils as well.
Indeed, and abundant and relatively complete. So there was no question about, well, is that the real proportions of Plesiosaurus? Because we had a complete Plesiosaurus that Hawkins could work with. Whereas with the dinosaur, you had this really quite alien animal form that was coming through the geological record to us initially in bits and pieces. And we can look back with historic hindsight and say, aha, actually, there are some specimens that Hawkins, or if Owen or Gideon Mantell was also involved in this very briefly, if those guys had really looked at this thing very carefully, they might have pushed dinosaur science ahead by several decades had they looked at this one specimen carefully enough. But of course, it's really easy to say that in hindsight once we've got 200 years of additional expertise on our side. Generally speaking, Hawkins didn't have much to work from, and so it meant that the visions of dinosaurs he came up with were quite different to what the actual animals were like. But the thing I would emphasize here is it's very easy to look at everything he got wrong, but I think it's more interesting to look at what he got right. And there's so much about all three dinosaur species that he reconstructed that he was actually quite precedent about. So their upright stance, for instance, they're all walking on columnar limbs. They're all clearly reptilian. And we know that he was looking at things like modern iguanas for anatomical reference, but he was able to override those modern analogs, if you like, by saying, okay, I'm going to look at an iguana, but this is an iguana that stands like a rhinoceros with its limbs down from its body. He was clearly considering the musculature of the animal. So if you're lucky enough to ever get close to them, you can see this a little bit, even from the pathways that surround the island, but you can see on his dinosaurs that he's sculpted in a muscle plan that conforms to, the sort of standard tetrapod muscle plan that we would expect. So these are very carefully produced models with all sorts of details and little nuances to them.
How long did they stay accurate, and what about them still holds up today, do you think?
So they didn't last all that long, to be honest, in terms of their scientific accuracy. Within really a decade or so, we started finding dinosaurs in North America that were hinting at bipedality for big ornithopods. So things like iguanodon, we're getting their sense that these animals are actually walking around on their back legs. And they have significantly shorter forelimbs. And the same with theropods. We found Dryptosaurus in the northeast of the United States. And this, of course, being a tyrannosauroid, has got very short forearms, much longer hind limbs. And so that's showing, that kind of bear-like megalosaur at Crystal Palace, it's almost certainly nothing like that.
Did they actually make a skeleton that looked like the creatures that are in Crystal Palace at any point? Or are they going off theories about what the bones could look like?
Good question. This is a part of the story that we don't have much data for. The planning and the design phase has not been passed down to us through history in any great detail. We know that they built scale models first, which were in theory sent over to Owen, and he would then give his sign off on them. Whether or not there were skeletons and things being produced, we certainly don't have any evidence of that. I mean, my gut feeling is probably not, because when you have a look at Hawkins' other projects where we do have a little bit more archival data, there isn't any indication that he was producing detailed skeletal sketches or anything of the animals he was reconstructing. Hawkins does have his hand in building the first ever dinosaur skeletal reconstruction of Hadrosaurus. So there is an element of him having an understanding of dinosaur skeletal anatomy, but I think that's an exception. If you look at he does sketches of things like pterosaurs and marine reptiles and things, and he's just going straight, or what we have evidence of him doing is going straight to the outline of the body and the full flesh reconstruction. Yeah, it's something that we'd like to know a lot more about. He certainly had it in his head as to what was going on under their skin.
So I'm looking at dinosaur fiction this season, and I was wondering whether you'd come across any stories that actually featured the dinosaurs from Crystal Palace.
Yeah, so they creep their way into educational books, some of which are written for children, and they have a sort of story element to them. So rather than just telling the history of life on Earth in a sort of fairly dry, totally factual fashion, it'll be characters taking children back to look at the age of monsters. And of course, they also enter into pop culture through things like the satirical cartoons of Punch,
right? Okay, yeah,
and magazines of that type. So they're used in sort of a satirical sense. So yeah, they do start to penetrate aspects of beyond pure science and beyond pure education, they also they have some influence on how people depict dinosaurs in general. So just in terms of their influence on wider culture, people start copying them a lot. So if anyone was writing about dinosaurs in a fictional context or otherwise, there's a good chance that for several decades after Crystal Palace, this is what people thought dinosaurs were like. But of course, it's as you'll have understand from your own reading, in the 19th century, dinosaurs weren't what they are today in terms of their cultural impact and their popularity. When we think about the prehistory nowadays, we really go very quickly to dinosaurs. But in the 19th century, we're talking about prehistoric saurians. We're talking about prehistoric animals in a much more general sense. People weren't, when the advertising and the promotion for Crystal Palace, the dinosaurs weren't really referred to as dinosaurs. They were just, like primordial reptiles and, primitive reptiles, this sort of thing. Yeah. So we didn't really start using the word dinosaur as a descriptive term for them until much later.
Because I came across there's a good story, The Dragon of St. Paul's, by two amazingly named journalists, Reginald Bacchus and Cyril Ranger Gull. And in there, this like winged creature is thawed out from a big block of ice and runs amok across London. And part of it, like a bystander who sees it screams that it's heading towards Crystal Palace. There's no actual mention of the dinosaurs, but it's clearly a satirical nod. And the fact that you don't have to even mention the dinosaurs there, it proves that the readers at the time would have known exactly what they meant just by that reference.
Yeah, and of course, there's also it's similar, just sort of small snippets here and there in other literature. Things like Bleak House, Charles Dickens' Bleak House, that mentions the Megalosaurus, trying to set the mood. And again, as you say, there's no sort of elaboration in particular of what a Megalosaurus is. He just assumes people know what it is because these were a big deal at the time. Among the public, at least, they were a big deal and widely liked.
Did Crystal Palace spark like imitators across the world? Did other countries start opening up dinosaur parks and things like that?
Really not, actually. There were a few efforts to do bits and pieces like this. So there was actually it didn't get very far, but there was plans for building models of prehistoric animals in parts of France before Crystal Palace.
Right.
But I don't think that ever moved beyond sort of a conceptual stage. In Russia, much later in the 19th century, until the 1880s, there is a sort of indoor exhibition with sculptures of prehistoric animals, some of which are based on other bits of paleo art from the 19th century. But yeah, they're few and far between. It isn't really until we get to the 20th century that the dinosaur park as a concept is really popularized, and you start seeing concrete dinosaurs on the side of the road in North America and World's Fair and this sort of thing. So it was not entirely unique throughout the entire 19th century, but it was certainly there's not many of them. And Crystal Palace is the only of the things that were sort of planned or executed during the 19th century. Crystal Palace is the only one that survives. So it's a very special place.
I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Mark, and thank you so much, Mark, for your time. That was fantastic. I'll be uploading our full interview next week for subscribers, where we chatted about his paleo art background and much, much more. It's incredible. You can also find his artwork and buy a print for yourself, which I urge you all to do by visiting markwitton.co.uk. That conversation really just made me want to visit Crystal Palace Park and have a look at these sculptures myself. So I got in touch with Andrew, a trustee at the Friends of the Crystal Palace Dinosaurs, and arranged a tour.
We are now approaching Crystal Palace.
So after about 3 train cancellations, I finally made it. And also,
thank you.
My visit coincided with Caleb Burnett from Jurassic Outpost being in the UK. So he joined me on the tour.
Hey! Nice to...
Great to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you. Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, how are you? Sorry, I'm late.
No worries at all. I have nowhere else to be. So.
Cool, right. Try and find Andrew. I think that might be Andrew. Andrew? Ah!
This is the first time for both of us seeing these sculptures and Caleb's first time in the UK. So let's get on with it.
My name is Andrew Brady. I'm a trustee with a charity called the Friends of Crystal Palace Dinosaurs, who were formed in 2013 during a period where they were looking pretty sad, and we, I guess, are a group of locals and enthusiasts and scientists who banded together to work out how best to conserve them.
Right, okay, nice. Let's make our way to the park.
So this station was built when the Crystal Palace was moved here, and part of the reason why the Crystal Palace was moved here was because one of the kind of board members of the Crystal Palace Company owned land here.
Oh, right,
and he was also senior in the London to Brighton Railway. So the station that we just came out was like created as an offshoot of the London to Brighton Railway to serve the new Crystal Palace.
Okay, because I was going to ask, why this part of London? Because South London, was this a particularly salubrious or kind of a recreational spot in Victorian London?
This was not part of London. This was Surrey.
Right. Okay. Of course. Yeah.
So if you look at most old maps of London, they don't go out this far at all. Yeah, this was an area called Penge Place or Penge Common, and Penge Place was owned by Leo Schuster, I think his name was.
Okay.
Who was a founding member of the Crystal Palace Company, who formed to purchase the Great Exhibition building, that was in Hyde Park. And so a mixture of him owning part of this land, the views out to the kind of Kent and Surrey Hills being very pleasant, and the fact that a line could be built fairly easily off of the main London to Brighton line.
Right. Okay.
So it was viewed that train would be one of the major transport methods to actually get here.
Because Crystal Palace was originally in Hyde Park.
Yes. When the Great Exhibition was built, which was a big project of Prince Albert, and it was nicknamed the Crystal Palace from, I think, Punch magazine.
Right. Yeah.
Because of how it kind of glistened.
Yeah.
And it was only going to be there temporarily. I assumed it was just carried here by many horses and carts. The original glass and iron, and it was expanded on. So although the original Great Exhibition building was longer and wider, it was kind of lower and had less kind of surface area inside. So it was a much grander build. And we're walking past the athletics stadium, which is in a sort of bowl shape in the ground, and this was one of the original giant water fountains. So when you look at when you look at a lot of the old illustrations and photographs in front of the palace, you see a range of water fountains, and there are two main ones off of the central walkway, and the site of those is now the athletic stadium on one side and the National Sports Centre on the other side.
Yeah, so that would have been the dramatic kind of opening salvo to...
Yeah, these were the main fountains that, to rival Versailles.
Right. Yeah.
Lots of projects can be traced back to let's compete against the French, pretty much.
That seems to be the thing to do.
A large part of the Crystal Palace Park site was its collection of kind of water pipes and steam-powered pumps to pump the water around the park, because the park is on a gradient, which makes things tricky. And you'll often see photos that have the giant water towers either side of the palace, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and those are the ones. That's part of the big water fountain infrastructure. But they realised even before the palace was finished that they wouldn't be able to afford to run the fountains on a regular basis. And when Queen Victoria came to open the palace in June 1854, they weren't finished. So she had to come back a little bit later on for the kind of grand opening. And then they owned the whole system of kind of steam engine pumps and everything ended up only being used for kind of special occasions and royal visitors. And then these main areas, these main fountain, the natural bowls of the major fountains were grassed over maybe 40 years after the palace opened. And we're walking past somewhere called Capel Manor Farm. And this is where we think Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins had his work shed.
Oh, okay.
So this is kind of holy ground.
Yes.
Although it was a wooden structure, so nothing has ever been found of it. But from accounts of people visiting, we believe it was here. So quite near the area where he was very busy in his life for about 2 years.
And so the dinosaurs weren't actually finished by the time so maybe a bit like the fountains, they weren't actually finished by the time it opened.
They were not finished. So you can pretty much kind of split the site between in terms of the extinct sculptures between the secondary island with the reptiles and the tertiary island with the more recent mammals. And the mammals were not on site.
Right, okay.
So they were still in his work shed. When the park opened, the water in the lake was not present either.
Okay.
And most of the reptiles, I think, were pretty much in place. I think there was some pterosaurs that were possibly not there quite yet, but also they hadn't finished painting. People who would visit on the main railway line would see the larger sculptures, and there's accounts of them being either red or white.
Okay.
And that corresponds to their base coats.
Right.
So pretty much painting was going on until Waterhouse Hawkins left the Crystal Palace project in mid to late 1855.
Right. Okay.
Now, the other thing to say is, we're walking past trees and grass and foliage. A lot of this was mud.
Okay.
We're also walking on a paved surface, and a lot of that even wasn't in place when the palace opened.
Wow,
so,
okay.
particularly for journalists coming to preview what was going on in early 1854, I think people had a job actually getting here. There were bits that were fenced off, bits of grass that were being grown, so it was a challenge. And in one account, Waterhouse Hawkins calls the secondary island Mud Island, to kind of give an idea of what the situation was, because this was all landscaped, and the lake, which most of the sculptures are very near, was built as a reservoir for the water fountain system.
Okay.
And as part of the water fountain system, the level of the water around the sculptures would rise and fall.
Okay.
To kind of mimic ancient tides. So you would see some of the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs sometimes partially submerged. As the Victorians thought. The Victorians thought that the plesiosaurs in particular were much likely to head on land, almost like seals.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
The ichthyosaurs slightly could also do that maybe sometimes, but were much more the kind of ocean.
Yeah.
The ocean guys.
So we've just rounded a kind of top of the hill, and we can get our first view of the sculptures. My first time seeing them, they're quite...
My first time as well.
Incredible. Yeah,
Wow.
So we have a view now of the kind of secondary island, and where we are backwards in geological time. So the aim was, if you're a Victorian coming to visit, this whole site was an educational project in geology and paleontology. You're walking through rocks of different ages, brought from different parts of the UK to the site for the purposes of of showing them in this geological court. And there's rocks from Yorkshire, from Derbyshire, from Bristol, and the whole aim was that you would walk through geological time with your little handbook, and you would look at the sculptures that were placed on the rocks of the same formation that their fossils were found in.
Okay.
And so roughly how it was described in the guidebook was you've got the kind of three geological periods. You've got the primary, secondary, and tertiary. So the bit we're standing on kind of now, and a little bit that we'll go around in a bit, is a kind of primary rocks.
Okay.
And then the secondary rocks start with the actual sculptures.
Fab. Brilliant. I mean,
You want to take it in?
Yeah, I mean, I've only actually ever seen them in like textbooks and stuff like that.
Amazing.
And, yeah, I don't know, it's just, we're probably getting a better view of them now than they actually did when they, if it was mud and, it's nice with all the trees and that, nice paved path, we're probably in a better experience than the Victorians.
Yeah, I mean, there are very few photos that exist of the site. There's a couple of main ones that are used for reference, and, they show a very barren landscape. You get a couple of photos in the kind of very late 19th century where things grow pretty fast.
Okay.
And things growing pretty fast is one of the conservation challenges of the site, as with anyone's back garden.
And I can see people actually working on the sculptures now.
So this is one of the advantages of coming on a weekday. Yeah. So what we're looking at the very tip of the secondary island. What in the Crystal Palace guidebook, which was written by Richard Owen, this is the area called the New Red Sandstone, and what we're looking at are the two. Arguably, the word "wrong" is obviously a key word which orbits any conversation about the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, and the labyrinthodon and the dicynodont, which you see behind them, are the key wrong species. Much more than the dinosaurs. The labyrinthodon captured imagination because it's effectively a giant frog. So people were calling it a cross between a frog and a cow, a frog and a rhino, and this was a big thing about the Victorians. This is what caused a lot of kind of flexion, I suppose, in that these creatures were something crossed with something.
Yes.
Of which no current.
I mean, you get that in
equivalent happens.
Yeah, I'm looking at Journey to the Centre of the Earth.
Yes.
And when they describe the ichthyosaur and the plesiosaur, it is described as like 5 or 6 different animals.
Yes.
And they can't take it as its own thing. They have to kind of work with their frames of reference, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. And with the labyrinthodon and the dicynodons, only the skulls were really found at the time. And with the labyrinthodon, Owen, in his guidebook, correctly was veering towards this skull looks like a bit like a salamander. It's a bit like an amphibian, but because of the confusion around footprints that were found in many of the kind of fossil areas, there was a confusion over it, how it kind of got around. So what you've got is effectively got 2 confused species, resulting in a giant frog. And often what you'd see in old art of the labyrinthodons would be its footprints behind, because its footprints were an extremely famous part of its kind of story.
Okay.
So in the end, Waterhouse Hawkins, looking at everything, came to the conclusion that we're seeing.
The surname Owen brings to my mind Owen in Jurassic World.
Yes.
And you were talking about how they're sort of a conglomeration of creatures. And in Jurassic World, we have the hybrid.
Yeah.
So feels a little bit full circle.
Yeah.
That's just very cool.
Yeah. So the labyrinthodons are interesting, I think, for the Victorians, because the Victorians' world, a lot of the articles on the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, when people first come to see them, is almost the kind of journalists in their Victorian prose manner, beginning this epic tale of ancient life. Once upon a time, the Earth was a molten ball, going through to fishes in the sea. And the labyrinthodons represent, for the Victorians, the first vertebrates on land. So trying to imagine a world, in which creatures are starting to populate the earth, rather than just the ammonites of the sea or the fishes of the sea.
And it looks like they've sort of just crawled out of the water. This is life first taking its first steps.
Yes, but I mean, very much. I mean, I think Waterhouse Hawkins was aware of the fact that they would be on the water's edge and that the water levels would raise. And because of the way that vertebrate fossils were found, the Victorians understood that the fossils of land animals were being found because they were being washed away. They'd be riverbanks, there would be estuaries, and so they associated a lot of the prehistoric life with naturally and automatically living by the water's edge. And then we have a collection of plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs. And there was an article that said that Waterhouse Hawkins did have a plan to have an ichthyosaur and plesiosaur in their classic stereotypical fight.
Yes.
So one of that, again, another vision from the very first paleo art, Juria, is, that the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs were locked in eternal combat, eternal enemies, and it might well be that it was too complicated to make something like that. The Victorians were, I think, very wowed by these.
Yeah.
They're the subject of a lot of kind of compliments in the articles. I think partly because their form is much more well understood at that time because of the much more complete fossil. The ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs were well understood from Lyme Regis for quite a few years. Yeah. The ichthyosaur in particular is usually referred to as a fish lizard.
Yeah.
And again, those kind of combinations of traits, complete with paddles, I guess really kind of captured the Victorians' imagination. And also the understanding from looking at them that these are probably very swift, agile creatures. And with the plesiosaurs, they're often called serpent fish in the literature, partly because of their snake-like neck. But a lot of the journalists that visited equated the snake-like neck with being swan-like. So they had these images of the plesiosaur kind of swimming in shallow water with its head kind of looking around like a swan. Obviously, the flexibility of the neck is probably one of the main areas that the plesiosaurs aren't as accurate as our current understanding. And we also I think generally the plesiosaurs are quite slim as well compared to what we now understand them to actually be.
Yeah, I mean, you were at the Natural History Museum a couple of days ago, and you were looking at those. Yeah. I mean, that would have been translated directly onto those skeletons that Mary
absolutely
found.
Yeah.
And this is the real.
And the art of the depictions of them here is arguably not that much different from the actual paleo art of the kind of time as well. People are looking at this through the lens of creatures that were here before man, and creatures that were in a world not fit for man.
Yeah.
And these creatures made way because they were primal, they were inferior, they were not destined to be in the natural order of things. And I think so. A lot of the descriptions of the dinosaurs that carry into later in the 19th century are quite wretched creatures, quite almost kind of doomed and hapless. And whereas with the ichthyosaurs, there is, maybe because they can imagine dolphins and how creatures with fins and flippers would live and seals, how they would imagine them being. So it's an interesting contrast, I think.
I feel like they're an early monument to our fascination with...
Yeah. Someone called them the Stonehenge of paleontology.
Yeah.
This is kind of sacred ground, but this is... When you see them, I am not a paleontologist. I have an interest in the history of science, but as kind of when you know the story and just when you see them as objects, you can turn around a kind of corner and you can see them every single time. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, I think if you like trains or if you like planes and you see your favorite things in museums, and no matter how many times you see them, you are taken aback because you kind of know their story, and you know how kind of tenuous their existence is, particularly outside with the elements.
Yeah. And now we get to
so we have
this is our John Hammond moment.
We have just passed a pair of teleosaurs,
and suddenly there we were in front of the 4 dinosaur sculptures. First up, Megalosaurus, with its huge mouth full of sharp teeth and a huge muscled hump between its shoulder blades, so it looks like it's stalking its prey, which happens to be the Palaeosaurus, with its back to us to accentuate its imposing spines to the megalosaur across its flank. And finally, 2 massive iguanodon with their famous thumb spike incorrectly placed on the end of their nose. They really are fearfully great.
There's no official record why there are actually two iguanodons. It could be differences of opinion of how they stood, how they lived, and also because iguanodon was by far the most famous of the three at that particular time.
Yeah,
because I guess the most of it was found.
Yeah, and so on my beach in Bexhill,
Yes,
they have the iguanodon
yes,
footprints.
amazing.
And then, those coupled with a little bit further away in West Sussex,
Yep.
you have them finding the teeth,
Yep.
Gideon Mantle.
Yep.
And it's just, that is my image of what a iguanodon looks like, no matter
Yeah.
sort of how wrong or incorrect it is.
This is it.
This is that pose of it
Yeah.
with its...
Looking kind of up,
Yeah.
looking a bit kind of guarded.
Yes.
Yeah.
Its front paw on a on a bit of what's that, palm tree or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been replaced many times over the years. So yeah, the Megalosaurus, generally in terms of when people first saw this and when people were writing up the site, this I guess was kind of the sort of top dog because it's the biggest and it's the carnivore.
Yeah.
And it's often, and again, the when you don't know something, you're thinking it's something crossed with something, and you can take your pick. You can hippo crossed with a crocodile, lion crossed with an elephant. They're looking at this as as extremely ferocious beast. But what they're also looking at this as, I think, is, again, we're looking at this and we're thinking this was a predator. We're imagining it, with it in its current form, much more what we understand it to be. But often the adjectives used to describe it were kind of colossal, slow. I really like one adjective, which was it's trying to describe the Megalosaurus walking down an old river Thames, and it's hobbling, as if hobbling is its default, as if hobbling is what a Megalosaurus does. It's afflicted because it's kind of doomed.
Yeah.
Obviously that in the Victorians' eyes, these guys are slow, sluggish, locked in eternal combat with each other, but again at probably at a slower rate than the marine lizards. I think that the hump being one of the main features, which Waterhouse Hawkins kind of tried to decide how can a kind of quadruped support such a huge jaw of teeth, and you have the kind of you have the hump that has been formed.
Yeah, and I suppose it then gives it that sort of, I don't know, like a little bit like the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes, yeah.
That sort of character.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doomed creature. And, Dickens,
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's any records of him actually coming here and looking at the Megalosaur. I'm sure he would have done a bout of interest, or whether just sat at home and read about it in the newspaper.
Yeah, we were looking at this. We were doing some historical research, and there was, we think he might have visited Waterhouse Hawkins' workshop.
Okay.
There was an article that was attributed to him that actually it turned out wasn't written by him. But yeah, I mean, we're always interested in finding out if certain people visited the site. We've got no record of Charles Darwin visiting, which we would really like, because Darwin was involved in the Crystal Palace. He was a patron of the cat show. Him and his wife. His wife would visit a lot more often, and he would come and visit animal shows because his other interests were particularly in poultry and pigeons and chickens. Mm-hmm. And the Crystal Palace would have shows on. If there was a show to kind of exhibit something like flowers, cats, dogs, animals, that would be held at the Crystal Palace. And so Charles Darwin did visit a few times, but we've got no letters or archival evidence of him visiting. And a lot of the history of the palace, a lot of the history of these dinosaurs and Owen and Mantell and Waterhouse Hawkins, it kind of predates the beef he had with Charles Darwin and Charles Darwin's allies. So Darwin is often, which much to my relief, is often external to the Crystal Palace dinosaur stories, because then the arguments with Owen and Darwin and all of that kind of phase of Owen's life I'm happy to talk about separately.
Yeah.
Because talking about Owen is exhausting because he was so busy.
Yeah.
And he was everywhere. And he was many things to many people.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, he's at the head of the table in the Iguanodon dinner.
Yeah.
He does a very eloquent speech. He raises a glass to, his rival Gideon Mantell, who he always viewed as being, he always viewed Mantell, I think, as being less professional.
He calls him an amateur in his obituary,
slightly lower class.
Yeah.
Class is a big thing back then.
Yeah.
Some of the stories about the rivalry where Owen is paying off certain fossil collectors, similar to what happened in the Bone Wars, is true. A lot of Owen's views on credit, in particular, are, is if you've found something, it's irrelevant until you've actually published something. So if he beats someone to the print, then that's fair game. But then also some of his legacy, I think, is just the amount of work he did, the amount of species he looked at, the amount of papers he published. There's a lot to be said for, I think, he made himself so busy around this period and after that often accused of kind of ghosting people and just losing correspondence. And there is evidence to say that he just becomes absent-minded. He gets older and he's trying to be everything everywhere. And even at this point, he's got his eyes on a natural history museum.
I suppose the Crystal Palace, that burns down quite dramatically. When's that? So that's just before the Second World.
The Crystal Palace burns down in 1936, which is a kind of key moment in kind of London history and the kind of memory of anybody that lived in London. I think it could be seen from miles away. Winston Churchill called it the end of an era, kind of like the kind of official ending of the Victorian kind of legacy. Right. And so I think one of the attractions of the Dinosaurs and the wider geological court is that the Crystal Palace is extinct, and as an attraction and as a concept, and these creatures are extinct, but these kind of transcend the extinctedness, this official scientific term.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's one of the alluring features, I think. And they could have easily vanished.
Because everything else is a lot of this is gone. These are the only things that really remain of that. And that time.
Yeah, but even there was meetings of a meeting in, I think, 1870, where one of the members of the Crystal Palace Company said that these sculptures had lost much of their truth. So I think what they were looking at is, are these a laughing stock now compared to our increased understanding, particularly of sort of dinosaur form, and should we do something about it? And I think his words were misread to mean that they needed fixing, like as in they were broken or they had cracks, and it turned out that wasn't taken forward. But again, there was a paleontology book in the 1880s where the intro to the book calls these unauthorized replicas rather harshly. So with all of the findings going on in the later 19th century, these are viewed as old, and these are viewed as wrong. But nostalgia is creeping in, even back then, which is really good to see. The other thing we had as well is these have suffered from people trespassing and vandalizing, and people were climbing on them. Just not that long after they first opened. There was enough fence to really block things off. There was often access via a kind of stepping stones, and I think sometimes the Victorians would just jump the lake in times of lower water. Yeah. So the first official damage of I think is of a boy sitting on the snout of a teleosaur. And I think they would also break off the teeth.
Okay.
Again, maybe a mixture of vandalism and a mixture of maybe they thought they were original teeth and valuable.
Right. Yeah. Sort of trophy hunting, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then famously, for many decades, people would climb inside the dinosaurs, as well. So they've got access hatches underneath, got like a kind of effectively a circle with a now with a metal grill. But again, when access was much more common and security in the park was different, you speak to a lot of local people and they've got memories up to the 80s of just playing in them. And
wow.
Kids would play in them, teenagers would smirk in them. They sometimes light fires in their mouths to make them look like they were belching smoke.
Dragons.
Yeah. And because the teeth were made of lead, that wasn't maybe the best. In hindsight, not the best thing, because obviously these are the main 4 dinosaurs are hollow.
Okay. Yeah.
They've got they're made of a combination of a kind of concoction of bricks and roof tiles and drain tiles. Again, I think Waterhouse Hawkins just had them available on site, and you've got this kind of hollow core with kind of metal supporting rods, and so you could climb in them quite easy. And there was an urban myth that somebody died, that a child died in them, or they were used as kind of wartime shelters. So yeah, the mythology of them is quite interesting.
So yeah, just standing here and you've got the water right in front of us, and that is a clear divide in the Victorians' mind of where dinosaurs are and where those stuff is. A more palatable form of paleontology.
And what you've got sitting in the water right in between these two islands is the Mosasaurus.
Ah, yeah, I couldn't even see that.
So one of the main OG casualties of the KT extinction. One of the kind of top dogs. Again, the Mosasaurus skull being, once it was effectively looted from I think the Netherlands to France, and Cuvier, again one of the kind of key species to understand extinction, the concept of extinction, the fact that these mammals found in the outskirts of kind of Paris, the Paris Basin, and the Mosasaurus skull, these are officially things that are not around anymore.
Yeah. And the dinosaurs have their back to us at this point.
Yes.
So again,
that's a good point.
So turning away, that's no more.
What's interesting is, obviously, in our eyes now, the dinosaurs here are long extinct.
Yes.
By the time the main extinction happens, but obviously they weren't to know that.
No.
And the Victorians' view is, the Victorians, I think, understood that labyrinthodons and kind of Triassic stuff, Permian stuff was there were no labyrinthodons when there were dinosaurs. So the Victorians understood that the antediluvian world, antediluvian being a key word in terms of before the flood. So you'd often see the word either antediluvian or pre-Adamite.
Okay.
And so this is the Victorians' minds being expanded, that the antediluvian world was not just a simple world. It consisted of stages. It consisted of layers, where some things found in some layers were not found in other layers. So one of my favourite sculptures is probably the Anoplotherium coming out of the water.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately we can't get up there right now, but it looks like it's effectively shaking itself dry. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a testament to Waterhouse Hawkins.
Yeah, I think that's what comes out of all of these, is that they are really good, there's a lot of art involved in them, and conscious construction, not just about the paleontology of them, but...
And there's some arguments with the mammals. Hawkins has much more reference to kind of go on, and there's maybe some arguments that maybe he was not necessarily lazy, but didn't just kind of went with features involved in kind of current mammals. But they are still amazing pieces of work. And what we've got around this area is, unfortunately, fewer sculptures than Waterhouse Hawkins wanted. So we can see Anoplotheriums and Palaeotheriums. We can see the Megatherium covered in scaffolding. Unfortunately, this path is off limits at the moment. We've got some Irish elks over there, but Hawkins had, Hawkins was planning Glyptodons, Dinotheriums, Civatheriums, in probably a tribute to Waterhouse Hawkins, in a tribute to Owen, he was planning a moa and a dodo. Again, that would be quite simple. And newspaper articles say he was working on a mammoth in July-ish 1855 when he was told to cease. Money's gone. Please leave. Thank you very much. Newspapers claim that the foundations had been lit, but no illustrations other than a small clay model in a museum, which may or may not have been linked to this site. The mammoth is lost in time. So yeah, I think the Crystal Palace was expensive to maintain as an undertaking. They had to pay a lot of money back to the London and Brighton Railway for the railway station and the railway line that had been built to facilitate visitors. They had originally, in terms of coming here to kind of eat food and have refreshments, their initial setup was not to the visitors' taste. Money issues in the fire that happened, money issues in the maintenance of the general maintenance and gardening and upkeep, and not only the upkeep of the outside sculptures and gardens, but the Crystal Palace was full of thousands of replica sculptures of art, of historic art and sculpture from museums around Europe that was arranged in different courts. So you had a kind of Roman court, a medieval court, various different ages, and so all of these sculptures needed touching up, painting. So it was, it definitely had a heyday, but I don't think, because of the concentrated impact that the Great Exhibition had in the mere months it was open in Hyde Park. Maybe the golden period was the original period where there were the first major concerts happening. The main concert area could hold thousands of musicians and singers. So it was extremely grand, but it was hard, I guess, to keep up that grandness as time marches on.
I also had to ask Andrew about the impact of Jurassic Park's release in 1993.
Jurassic Park changes everything in terms of, I think, dinosaur views. If you just do a simple exercise in counting newspaper articles that mention keywords about dinosaurs over the years, 93 is an explosion, absolute explosion. And so when Jurassic Park comes out, the park is under different management. It's still kind of technically legally owned by Bromley Council. There are park rangers. There is an organisation called the Crystal Palace Foundation, who still exist to this day. They are local enthusiasts and historians who create a charity at the end of the 1970s, I think, to raise awareness of Crystal Palace, of the richness of the history, to collect kind of oral histories of people's memories of the sites. They were responsible for opening up a museum, which was just up the hill from the station. And when Jurassic Park comes out, you can sense there's a massive opportunity for them. And dinosaurs are huge now. This is where dinosaurs, this is the spiritual home of dinosaurs. Its impact is, it's almost like a fossil record of newspaper article. Jurassic Park it's almost like it's the start of a new age. I think. And you see plenty of people around here, plenty of teenagers with Jurassic Park T-shirts, and I'm talking to some biased guys.
You're 33 years later with a Jurassic World Rebirth shirt on.
But interestingly, we did an event, we did a series of events about 2023, I think, 2022, in the park. The park was filled with lights, Christmas lights and lantern. And one of the visitors to our stand was Colin Trevor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so he said hi. He's got a Crystal Palace Dinosaurs T-shirt. I think he was just visiting.
Yeah.
My huge thank you to Andrew for the tour. Both Caleb and I really love learning about the site, and it was just a perfect way to experience these incredible sculptures for the first time. Now, I asked Andrew the best way to support the Friends, and he said simply awareness of them was one of the best ways. He's right, because I'm still amazed that more people don't know about them. And that's a real shame, because they are fascinating and should be as widely visited, I think, as places like the Natural History Museum. You can also find out more about the restoration that is currently taking place there. It's very nearly finished, by following them on Instagram and Facebook at CP Dinosaurs, or their website, which is cpdinosaurs.org. Another way to help support them is by purchasing Eleanor Michaels and Mark Witton's book called The Art and Science of the Crystal Palace Dinosaurs. They gave up their author rights so that all the money goes to charity. Links to that and everything else that I've mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes below. But my road trip is not yet at an end, as next time.
I know, I came to the museum as a kid, as a visitor when I was about 7, 8 years old, and I don't remember much about that visit, but the image that sticks in my head the most was walking in the front door and seeing Dippy the dinosaur in the main hall. Mm-hmm. That image is burned into my mind, and I'm sure for a lot of people it's that feeling of awe at the scale of the building.
That's right. Next week I'm bringing you my interview that I recorded at the Natural History Museum. In it I explore its history and impact on the dinosaur story. But until then, I'll just say thank you very, very much for listening, and goodbye.